Hello and welcome back to another video on this channel. Today I want to talk about job speculation. I know these kinds of videos are really common, but I just figured, why not just add my 2 cents. I have 5 jobs in mind that I think might get added. As usual though, we need to first talk about how this video is going to work. First off, I won't be discussing Geomancer. This is because I recall them confirming that the Astro job quests weren't a sign of Geomancer coming to the game. Rather, it was just an illusion they wanted to throw in. Furthermore, the quest itself has a clear message of astrology and geomancy just being 2 sides of the same coin, which to me signals that it's not being planned. Plus, I wanted to have this be 5 jobs, which is a more nicer and cleaner number than 6. This definitely doesn't mean Geomancer will never happen. I mean to simply just say that it's most likely not that acute to, warrant being on this list. Second, I will go over the jobs in the order of how likely I see them as being added, starting from the most vague to the most likely. Third, as usual, this is just my own opinion, so keep that in mind. With that out of the way, let's talk about these supposed jobs. At number 5, I decided to have Mystic Knight. This is among my favorites in Final Fantasy jobs and also the one I wish to see the most in FF14. Mystic Knights have a lot in the way of sustainability. They carry decent armor, are typically strong against magical attacks thanks to some form of auto shell. They attack with swords and have a vast array of utility in the form of status ailments, MP drain and HP drain. Some of them can also absorb the element that they currently wield in their swords. However, don't let this supporting nature fool you, since Mystic Knights are offensive fighters through and through. With their magic-infused swords, they can cut right through an enemy's defenses like hot butter, and are especially dangerous against any foe that isn't prepared against both physical and magical attacks. The Mystic Knight was introduced in FF5. Their specialty revolved around being able to use purchased spells and imbuing them to their sword. The advantage to this was that you could attack an enemy physically while dealing a lot of extra damage, especially if hitting their weakness. They also came with a passive that casts shell if they dropped to low enough health. They could also use better armor than actual mages, so they were a bit more tanky. Other cases include FF6, where Celes had an ability with her runic blade where she could have her blade negate any magic attack that was aimed at her or any of the party members. FF9, where Steiner could attack with an element spell if Vivi was in the party by having him imbue his sword with black magic. And then of course Bravely Default expanded on it even more by replacing Shell with a simple magic defense increase whenever you got hit by a magic attack, having an MP absorb effect that could be replaced with sword magic. Being able to sacrifice physical defense in exchange for magic defense, letting you reduce damage from the element that you imbued with, allowing you to make the MP costs even higher in exchange for more damage with the spell sword, counter-attacking with fire attacks when hit, etc, etc. So let's talk about how this could be incorporated into F14. The Mystic Knight has 2 choices, either a tank or a melee DPS. Tank makes sense, since they are known to wear decent armor and their specialization in magic defense, allowing them to take over Dark Knight in this role. They also have draining capabilities, allowing for great sustainability. The closest comparison I could draw to would most likely be Dark Knight, with that emphasis on magic defense and having MP as a thing you'd have to manage. On the flip side, as I mentioned, the Mystic Knights are very offensive oriented, because they would always be able to deal a ton of damage if they were able to abuse an enemy's weakness. And even if they weren't, they could still employ spells such as Drain, Osmose, or Flare for piercing the enemy's defenses and dealing more damage. Hence, you could easily make an argument for a melee DPS as well. As a melee, I'd look at something like Ninja, with the way they use different elements, but with Mystic Knight having its own uniqueness, of course. For the AF armor, I'd like a Judge Magister look from FF12. I think this would be really fitting to the class's theme. For the weapon, I'd use a regular sword but have it be customized with this Magitech sort of technology. The class would basically be Garlemald inspired by using Magitech to infuse your sword and attack the enemy's weak points. This would basically make it similar to what we first thought Gunbreaker would be like, and in fact the Mystic Knight would use a similar job gauge as the cartridges. Basically, you charge up these Magitech charges by finishing combos and so on, and these charges would let you unleash those spell-based Magitech attacks. For example, a Thunder-based attack for a damage over time, a Holy-based attack for a stun, a Drain-based attack to absorb HP from the enemy, a Wind-based spell to reduce your CCD temporarily, an Earth-based spell for mitigation, a Fire-based spell for a damage increase, an Ice spell for MP reduction, Flare to make the enemy take more damage, etc, etc. Of course, I'm not saying to add all of these elements, and obviously to be balanced and play around different cooldowns, but this interaction between the job gauge and using MP to attack with your sword imbued by spells using Magitech would be the core theme of the class. As for why I think it would be added, the reason I had this at 5, despite it being the one I want the most, is because there isn't that much coherent evidence pointing towards this being added. The only thing I have to go off of is that we have encountered enemies that do use spell imbued attacks, a lot of them Garlean, so there is that vague connection with the next expansion supposedly taking place in Garlemald. Next up, at number 4, we have Chemist. Chemist 2 was introduced in FF5. The idea behind this class is simple: provide support with items and be able to mix items together for even more powerful effects. Think of it like a combat version of Alchemist here in 14. Kinda like how in 1.0 you could debuff the enemy as a miner, for example. Of course, most people don't remember Chemist from FF5, since as a supporting class it was overshadowed by Blue Mage, and Chemist has made an appearance in an abundance of titles like Tactics, Ten 2, Bravely Default, etc. But I won't be talking about those, simply because I don't need to. Most people recognize Chemist the easiest if I just talk about Riku in FF10. In FF10, they made Riku specialize in using items as is the norm for a chemist, but they went a step further and made the mix command a limit break. This meant that in exchange for having it require a limit break gauge, it had to have strong effects. And strong effects it did have, as anyone who played FF10 knows. Riku's mixes were through the roof busted, and that's why most people would recognize Chemist from that game. When we talk about the implementation of Chemist into 14, we have to address the elephant in the room: limited jobs. Now, I know that a lot of people are fully opposed to the idea of limited jobs and never want to see more of them, but I will try to keep away from that discussion in this video and just focus on what Yoshida said about potentially adding more of them in the future. Chemist, I think, has a lot of interesting potential to be an interesting limited job to play around with, since that would allow them to go ham and add in hundreds of combinations, mixing different items, and it would be really beneficial to the game and its economy by making some old items really useful again. Once you consider the job limited and remove balancing as a factor, the possibilities with Chemist become endless, really. Hundreds and hundreds of item combinations with a ton of different cool effects. Chemist and Blue Mage would also complement each other really well when playing together in content, I feel, with how they are both support oriented, but both also have a massive potential to deal damage. If we go with the normal job route, then Chemist would obviously be a healer, and would most likely have similar utility as Astrologian does. Its main job mechanic would probably be similar to the ninjutsu system from Ninja, where you can input certain combinations with varying outcomes, but in the skin of mixing components together instead of mudras. The AF armor would be really easy to implement, as they could simply be slight variations of the alchemist gear. The weapon, however, is a bit more tricky. Based on past versions of chemist and chemist characters, daggers and claws would both work, but obviously we already have those. You could still take inspiration from Riku and have them use grenades, and bombs do exist in 12, so it would add up. The reason I put this at number 4 is because, similar to Mystic Knight, there isn't too many hints of getting this job anytime soon. The main thing I can think of is the addition of certain healing items in Bozja in 5.35, such as Auto Potion and Auto Ether. At number 3 is going to be Time Mage. Now, Time Mage is hard for me to personally talk about, since, no offense, I always found it to be a bit lacking in all of the games I've played, that had one in it.
Out of the way, you!
This class was introduced first in FF5, and yes, this is a common theme in this video. A little side note, Dancer and Samurai were first introduced in FF5 as well. Time Mage belongs to the caster family along with guys like Black Mage, White Mage and Summoner. It's a staple and appears in a lot of titles. They are known for skills such as Haste, Slow Gravity, Quick and Meteor, which yes was originally a Time Mage ultimate spell, not Black Mage. They also have interesting skills in some games, such as in Bravely Default, where they can speed up combat for both sides, or let you retry a battle after losing it instead of getting a game over. Now, talking about Time Mage in 14 is a bit technical due to the existence of Astrologian. However, many were quick to point out with the pruning of Astro skills in Shadowbringers that maybe it's a sign of Time Mage coming to the game. This is also why it's number 3 on the list, as now we're starting to get into things that seem a bit more likely. In 14, Time Mage would be definitely a healer, not only because of its supporting nature, but also because in FF titles that did not have Time Mage, their iconic spells were always listed under White Magic. So it just seems obvious to make it healer. Time Mage would make for an interesting healer, as you could take advantage of the theme of time, extending regions, freezing the time on barriers or extend the timer of a debuff on the boss, reversing someone's HP pool to a previous state, maybe even having a skill to freeze the enemy's cast bar, and things of that nature. You could give them a buff akin to Feywind in the form of Haste 2/Hastka, just a minor CCD decrease, so it doesn't completely screw over jobs. There's just a lot of potential with this job to make it feel unique and fresh. Time Mage also fits into the setting quite nicely, as time magic is implied to be used by the Elegants in the Hildebrand quests in Heavensward. The weapons and armor both would probably be very White Mage and Black Mage inspired. Personally, I am not that sold on Time Mage. I think that Astro is close enough, and so I don't feel that the addition of Time Mage is warranted, even though it's a possibility. Number 2 is Beastmaster. Beastmaster is definitely a unique job within the series. It was introduced in FF5, and it plays around being able to control and capture mobs, which you could then release to have them do specific attacks. Because of its nature of being able to control enemies, it's often used hand in hand with blue magic, where you first take control of the enemy and then manually input a certain attack on yourself to make the blue mage learn that skill, which removes a lot of danger and hassle of waiting for the enemy to do what you want. The two most notorious examples of this are in FF5 and in FF7, by using the manipulate materia to learn skill for the enemy skill materia. This synergy with blue brings me nicely into opening the can of worms again by entertaining the idea of having Beastmaster as a limited job. The reason I say this is because Beastmaster is very similar to Blue Mage, in that it interacts with the world a lot. You capture monsters and use them to your advantage. If it was turned into a proper job, this aspect would be completely gutted, and I know that a lot of people are not satisfied with Scholar and Summoner, as pet-based jobs, so there isn't a lot of trust that they could nail this one. The whole controlling enemies aspect would also be completely removed, as it would not be balanced at all. But once again, making the job limited allows them to crank it up to 11, when they don't have to worry about balance as much. The way it would work as a limited job would basically be to let you capture certain enemies, even some bosses potentially. This would obviously be limited, such as no, you wouldn't be able to capture Alexander Prime, but Arhideus, most likely yes, as an example. You could then summon any enemies you have captured to fight alongside you in combat. It's pretty hard to get into specifics because we don't know what kind of limitations the developers are working with when it comes to pets, but I'd ideally like it to have a similar structure to how Bluemates works, but still feeling distinct, while also synergizing well with Bluemates in combat. As a basic example, having different Beastmaster pets count as different roles, so the Bluemage could use ethereal mimicry mid-fight on a pet to swap their role, things of that nature. They can also go with the FFXIV 2 route and make it so that you can customize your pets that start at certain roles and have a certain tree of skills they can learn from, and you can then rename them, teach them skills, level them up, etc, etc. I mean, now I'm picturing a Corpocure casting Mega Flare. Appearance-wise, I'd stick mostly with the original FF5 look, whips and having fur-based clothing. The reason why I have this so high on the list is because we have already encountered 2 Beastmasters in Shadowbringers, first with Ranjit in 5.0, and now Leon in 5.35 in Bozja. Having all these characters as Beastmasters, but not following up with it, would be strange, so we can definitely expect this job to come out sometime soon. Alright, so this is my pick for being the most likely job to appear in the near future. However, it isn't really a job, it's more like a character.
What the heck are you talking about?
It's Gaia. You may be asking, what do you mean Gaia? Well, consider that we often have characters that represent jobs that are going to release in the near future, such as Tancred as Rogue, or Gosetsu as Samurai. I personally believe that Gaia is showing us a job coming up in 6.0, and I have a few points to support this theory. She has a unique weapon type, that being a hammer. She has very unique traits both with her dark/void magic and time magic abilities, which could combine into a class when used together as mechanics. More on this later. She has a connection to the first, potentially allowing for some cool class quests, even if you unlock the job in the source. Again, more on this later. Most of you are probably aware of Gaia by doing Eden's verse. She's a girl suffering from memory loss with mysterious origins, who supposedly carries the title Oracle of Darkness. We know she was being possessed by Voidwalker, or something possessed her, making her possess the Voidwalker, either way. Her powers are also mysterious, with her being able to use some form of time magic, and supposedly having some sort of power of darkness within her. Based on this knowledge, it's hard to draw exactly what kind of job we would be seeing from Gaia's characteristics, but this video is speculation, so we'll do just that, speculate. The first problem we have is that the job needs to be unlockable from A Realm Reborn in the source, like the past 5, well technically 5, jobs. This is of course difficult due to Gaia's unique powers. However, I would personally have it work out like this. The class unlocks at level 70, you unlock it in Ul'dah, and through events which I'm too lazy to make up, you end up eventually receiving the Soul Crystal for this job. Now, what would we call this job? I personally think that Voidwalker would be a fitting name. That would tie in with how we first meet Gaia under the guise of Voidwalker, but it also fits the name of the job, specializing in dark magic. Basically, think of it as arcane magic from 12, or like a necromancer based class without any pets attached to it, or the whole reviving the dead aspect. So you learn stuff under this person till level 80. Now to do quests at 80, you need to have done the 5.2 Eden raid. The class quests from 80 to 90 have you interacting with Gaia. This will unlock the whole time mage aspect of the class. Sorry that the story portion may seem a bit messy, and yes, I am aware that there are some continuity issues to this, such as with how it conflicts with the Thaumaturge and Black Mage quest lines, or the aspect of how you would persuade the Warrior of Light to start practicing forbidden dark magic, etc. Naturally, some things have to be altered a bit, but it's pointless to talk about the execution story-wise since they can always implement plot devices to allow you to learn stuff. I am just giving a rough idea on how the class could be implemented. Anyway, let's talk about how I think the class itself would play. I will display some of the class's abilities on screen that go a bit more in detail, while my commentary talks about the job in a more general sense. So, we have a class that uses a hammer, has arcane/dark magic, and a little time mage aspect to it. For me, I would go with a melee DPS, and I would draw inspiration from Dragoon for this one. The void aspect of the job would basically be similar to the Life of the Dragon aspect that Dragoon has, where you attack regularly with your hammer, and have certain abilities that charge your void gauge to unleash these devastating dark aspected attacks. With the time manipulation aspect mixed in, you can honestly do so much with this that I'm a bit at a loss of what you would exactly do with it. But unlike what I was discussing with Time Mage, in here it would be a more offensive than support oriented way of using time manipulation. You could, for example, be able to freeze your gauge, so you can keep firing off more dark magic before the gauge runs out. Or you could have an ability that's kind of like wildfire that stores a portion of your damage, but you can then choose to detonate it whenever, dealing a portion of the damage you dealt in that window a second time, similar to Voidwalker's delayed attack mechanic, but without, cocking your initial damage. I also wouldn't have a GCD buff like Samurai, Ninja or Monk, and instead have it be a slow one with hard-hitting attacks, again, a bit similar in Dragoon in that regard. I would also probably have it share gear with Dragoon to go with this tanky type look with that hammer. Again, as with my previous examples, when I mean draw inspiration from a certain class, I don't mean that as a complete copy-paste, like having Delirium function identical to IR. I refer to simply the basic foundation of the class, more on the level of how you'd say that Samurai and Ninja are similar in revolving around 60-second timers and having GCD buffs, but obviously they play very different and have their own distinct feel. I think that the Voidwalker could really fill a nice role within FF14. It would cater to the audience that want a Necromancer type character that, casts dark magic, while also catering to people who wanted time magic but in an offensive form, while also satisfying people who preferred to use a hammer as a weapon. And of course it would be nice to have a second class that benefits from maiming gear. Gameplay wise, it would fall in somewhere between Ninja, Samurai, Dark Knight and Dragoon. It has that slow GCD and similar gauge mechanics to Dragoon, with similar aesthetics to Dark Knight, but it has similar utility to Ninja, while having on-demand and flexible bursts like Samurai, but even more so with the unique time skill to be able to front-load a lot of damage, whether it be on an ad spawn, pushing a specific phase, or a reopener with all your buffs up. Anyway, that's my list for what I want to see as upcoming jobs. This is where I'm going to ask the question, which jobs do you want to see yourself? I am aware that I left out a lot of potential jobs in this list, because I kinda wanted to just cover the ones that were the most interesting for me to talk about. So I apologize if your favorite job wasn't represented at all in my video. So yeah, just leave me a DM or down in the comments below, just let me know what jobs you yourself want to see the most, or if you found any of these ideas interesting. In any case, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.